Husband gave his wife divorce papers as a birthday gift. He never expected what happened next. If your spouse handed you divorce papers on your birthday, what would you do? Now let us go back to where it all began. 30 candles were still burning when Marcus Reed slid the divorce papers across the marble island and told his wife, "Happy birthday." For one suspended second, Amani Brooks Reed thought she had misunderstood him. The candles trembled in the draft from the hidden vents above the Buckhead kitchen. Tiny flames reflected in black glass windows that overlooked Atlanta like a field of distant stars. Her hand remained beside the untouched cake, fingers resting against the cool edge of the plate. Marcus stood across from her in a charcoal suit, one cuff already unbuttoned, his expression calm enough to make the cruelty feel rehearsed. Between them lay a cream-colored envelope with her name written across the front in his clean, impatient handwriting. For Amani, a new beginning. She opened it without speaking. The first page carried the seal of the Superior Court of Fulton County. Complaint for divorce. Her eyes moved once over the filing information, then stopped on the timestamp. 9:12 a.m. He had filed it that morning, on her 30th birthday. Behind the complaint sat a proposed settlement agreement and an acknowledgement of service, each page marked with neat yellow tabs where Marcus expected her signature. "I thought it would be better to do this privately," he said. His voice had the polished softness he used with investors when announcing something they had already decided to accept. Amani drew in a slow breath through her nose. Chocolate, candle wax, Marcus's expensive cologne. 7 years of marriage reduced to smells she suddenly wanted out of her lungs. "Privately," she repeated. Marcus mistook the quietness for shock. She saw it in the way his shoulders loosened. "There's no reason for this to become ugly. The agreement is fair. More than fair, actually." He turned the papers toward her as though presenting a contract to a nervous junior employee. The Buckhead house would remain with him. Each would retain their individual company interests. There was a lump sum payment, confidentiality language, pages of careful legal distance disguised as generosity. "You'll be comfortable," he said. Comfortable. The word landed harder than he seemed to notice. Amani looked past him toward the dining room, where a bottle of champagne sat unopened beside 2 crystal glasses. He had arranged the scene before she came downstairs. Cake, champagne, divorce. The symmetry was almost elegant. "How long?" she asked. Marcus's mouth tightened slightly. "How long what?" She lifted her eyes to his. "How long have you been planning my birthday?" Something flickered across his face, irritation perhaps, then disappeared. "Amani, don't make this theatrical." She almost smiled at that. For years, Marcus had built entire rooms around spectacle, funding announcements, product launches, glossy profiles about the visionary founder of Crescent Grid Technologies. He knew theater better than anyone. He simply disliked it when someone else noticed the stage. His phone lit on the counter. Vanessa Price. The name appeared for less than a second before Marcus turned the screen face down. Amani watched his hand do it. 6 weeks ago, that movement might have broken something inside her. Tonight, it only confirmed the shape of what was already dead. "Sign the acknowledgement," Marcus said. "Then our attorneys can handle the rest." Cleanly, Amani closed the settlement agreement and placed it back inside the envelope. She did not touch the pen he had left beside it. His confidence faltered by half an inch. "You're not signing?" "Not tonight." "Amani." She stood, smoothing one palm over the dark blue fabric of her dress. Her breathing was steady now. On the far side of the kitchen, almost hidden beneath a stack of unopened mail, lay an old red tab transaction binder from Crescent Grid's first major financing years ago. She had brought it home weeks earlier and forgotten to return it to storage. Marcus followed her glance but dismissed the binder almost instantly. Old paperwork. Old history. Nothing that mattered anymore. That was the first mistake he made after giving her the divorce papers. He assumed the woman standing before him had nothing left to read. Marcus stared at the unsigned papers as if Amani had just violated some private law of gravity. "Not tonight," he repeated. The candles behind her had begun to gutter, wax slipping down their sides onto the chocolate frosting in pale, crooked trails. Amani stayed where she was, one hand resting lightly against the marble island, the dark blue fabric of her dress catching the warm pendant light. She could feel her pulse in her throat, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rush, shake, or plead. Marcus picked up the settlement agreement and tapped it once against the counter. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." His phone vibrated again. This time he did not bother hiding Vanessa's name quickly enough. A message preview flashed across the screen. Is it done? Marcus turned the phone over. The movement was practiced, almost casual, and somehow that made it worse. Amani looked at him, not the phone. Does she know you gave them to me tonight? His jaw tightened. Vanessa has nothing to do with this. I didn't say her name. Silence pressed into the room. Marcus exhaled through his nose and reached for his champagne glass, though neither of them had touched the bottle. This is exactly why we're here, Amani. You turn everything into an emotional test. She almost answered, but stopped herself. He had always been best when he could force her into defending her own reaction instead of examining his behavior. So she let the accusation hang unanswered. That unsettled him more. You've been gone from the company for years, he continued. You have your shares, your inheritance, your comfortable little life. You'll be fine. There it was again. Fine. Comfortable. Reduced, packaged, managed. Crescent Grid doesn't need a divorce becoming a distraction. Investors don't need to wonder whether you're going to suddenly start interfering in decisions you haven't been part of. Amani's eyes moved toward him slowly. Interfering? Marcus gave a short laugh. You know what I mean. Operationally, you're not involved. I've been running the company. I've been carrying the responsibility. His tone sharpened with each sentence, gathering confidence. From its own momentum, you own 18% on paper, Amani. That doesn't make you an executive. It doesn't make you relevant to the day-to-day business. He said it with the certainty of a man explaining weather to someone standing in the rain. Amani remembered fluorescent lights in their first borrowed office, sleeping beneath a wool coat while code compiled at 3 in the morning. She remembered Marcus pacing behind her, rehearsing a pitch built around an optimization model she had not finished testing yet. She remembered fixing it anyway. None of those memories reached her face. Marcus leaned closer. And before you start thinking 18% gives you some kind of leverage, it doesn't. Those votes have been handled through me for years. Investors know me. The board deals with me. The company speaks through me. He paused, expecting the words to shrink her. Instead, Amani glanced toward the red-tabbed binder again. Marcus followed her eyes and scoffed. That old Series A paperwork? Seriously. He crossed the kitchen, picked up the binder without asking, and dropped it beside the divorce papers. This is what I mean. You're looking backward. His fingers rested on the cover. Amani watched them. Marcus, she said quietly, put it down. He smiled, thin and patronizing. Why? It's company property. He opened the binder and flipped past documents carrying both their names, barely looking at the pages. My lawyers have been dealing with this kind of stuff for years. Amani said nothing. She only watched him turn page after page with the careless familiarity of someone who had forgotten the difference between controlling something and owning it. By 8:30 the next morning, Marcus had already begun turning the divorce into an administrative fact. Amani sat in the passenger seat of her own silence while the city moved past the Buckhead windows in gray ribbons of early traffic, the unsigned acknowledgement still inside the cream-colored birthday envelope on her lap. She had slept less than 2 hours. Not because she wanted him back. That was the part that surprised her. The ache came from realizing how efficiently he had prepared to remove her. At 7:14 a.m., an email from Crescent Grid's executive administrator informed her that her building access would be temporarily limited during the leadership transition. At 7:26, another message said she had been removed from several internal distribution lists because she was no longer active in operations. Then came Marcus's text. Please don't turn this into a company issue. Sign the acknowledgement and let counsel handle the rest. Amani read it twice before locking her phone. He had spent years telling everyone she had stepped away voluntarily. Now, before she had even answered the divorce complaint, he was making that version of history operational. She drove not to Crescent Grid headquarters, but to a quiet law office in Midtown where Denise Holloway had agreed to see her before her first court appearance of the day. Denise was 52, composed, and unimpressed by expensive stationery. She read the proposed settlement without speaking, turning pages with the slow precision of someone checking a bridge before walking onto it. He wants speed, Denise finally said. Amani sat across from her, still wearing the same dark blue dress beneath a camel coat she had thrown on before leaving the house. He wants me tired. Denise glanced up. That too. She tapped the acknowledgement of service. Signing this doesn't mean you agree to the divorce terms. It means you acknowledge receipt and waive formal service. But you don't sign anything because he put a tab on it. Amani nodded. That distinction mattered. Marcus had presented the entire packet as though every signature led to the same surrender. Denise moved to the settlement agreement. In this language here, each party retains their individual company interests. That sounds simple. It is not the same thing as saying those interests have no marital value, and it certainly doesn't answer who owns what or who has authority over what. Amani's fingers tightened around the edge of the envelope. He told me my 18% didn't give me leverage. Denise's eyes sharpened. Do you own 18%? Yes. Directly? Amani hesitated. The shares are mine, but Marcus has voted them for years. Denise leaned back. Through what? That was when the red-tabbed binder came back into Amani's mind with painful clarity. The way Marcus had flipped through it in the kitchen, dismissing signatures, schedules, old financing documents as debris from a life he believed he had outgrown. A proxy, she said. From the series A financing. Denise did not react dramatically. She simply reached for a legal pad. Do you have a copy? At the house. Then before you agree to anything about company interests, I want the stock records, the proxy, the cap table, and every agreement bearing your signature. Amani looked toward the window. Across the street, people hurried into offices carrying coffee, phones, ordinary mornings. Marcus was probably already at Crescent Grid telling himself he had contained the problem. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated notice from the company's security system. Her executive access credentials had been disabled. Amani stared at the message until the sting passed. Then she placed the birthday envelope on Denise's desk, but kept the acknowledgement outside it. I'm not signing this today. Denise gave a single nod. Amani reached for her phone and opened an old cloud folder she had not touched in years. Series A closing documents. The files were still there. And I want to verify exactly what I still own, she said. Amani's refusal produced its first consequence before noon. Denise had asked her not to call Marcus, not to answer his texts, and not to argue with anyone at Crescent Grid about the disabled credentials. Instead, she told her to verify the record. So Amani sat in the quiet conference room outside Denise's office with her laptop open, the Series A closing folder glowing against the dark screen, and began pulling documents one by one. Stock purchase agreements, board consents, investor rights papers, cap tables, then the proxy. Her name was there exactly where she remembered it, signed years earlier when Crescent Grid was still small enough that every financing meeting felt like a referendum on whether they would survive another quarter. Amani read the first page, then the second, then stopped herself. Denise had warned her not to interpret legal language alone when emotions were this raw. Send it to me, she had said, and send the current cap table if you have it. Amani did both. Then she called the company's outside stock administrator, not to demand access or threaten anyone, but to ask one narrow question. What percentage of Crescent Grid Technologies was currently registered in her name? The representative would not discuss voting authority without reviewing the file, but ownership was easier. After identity verification and a short hold, the answer came back unchanged. 18% of the outstanding common equity, Ms. Brooks read. Amani closed her eyes for half a second, not because the number surprised her, because Marcus had spent the night speaking as though those shares were decorative, something she technically possessed but practically could not touch. And there has been no transfer, she asked. Not according to the current ledger. She thanked the representative and ended the call. No speech, no triumph, just confirmation. At Crescent Grid, meanwhile, Marcus was doing exactly what Denise predicted. He moved through the Midtown headquarters with the confidence of a man who believed the unpleasant part had already happened. He told senior staff the divorce was private. He told one director Amani was taking some time. He told Vanessa there would be no disruption to the company. By late morning, he had approved a draft communication describing Amani as a former operating contributor with no current management responsibilities. The language was technically careful and emotionally brutal. Vanessa suggested removing her founder photograph from an internal anniversary presentation because it could create confusion. Marcus agreed without hesitation. Across town, Amani received the same presentation from an engineer who had once worked under her. No commentary, just the file. She opened it and saw Marcus centered beneath the words founder vision. Her own face was gone. For several seconds, she looked at the screen while a memory rose with unwanted clarity. The two of them years earlier in a borrowed office, standing before a whiteboard dense with system architecture she had drawn by hand. Marcus had been grinning at the camera. She had been looking at the code. The original photograph still existed somewhere in the old company archive. She did not search for it yet. Instead, Denise returned with the proxy printed in her hand. "Your shares are yours," she said. "That part is clear." Amani watched her place the document beside the birthday envelope. "And the voting arrangement?" Denise rested one finger against the first page. "It exists. It is limited. And I want to read every termination provision before I tell you what Marcus can or cannot still do with it." Amani nodded. It was not victory. It was something smaller and more useful, ground beneath her feet. Denise gathered the papers into a neat stack, but Amani reached out and kept the current stock ledger confirmation for herself. Marcus could remove her from an email list. He could disable a badge. He could even erase her photograph from a slide. But the record in front of her still carried her name. And for the first time since the candles burned down the night before, Amani understood that not everything he had treated as his had actually moved when he told it to. The first sign that Amani's quiet resistance had reached Crescent Grid came at 2:17 that afternoon, when Marcus's executive assistant walked into his office holding a printed email and closed the door behind her. Vanessa was already there, perched on the edge of the conference table with a tablet in her hand, reviewing talking points for an investor dinner scheduled that evening. Marcus barely looked up. "What is it?" The assistant placed the paper in front of him. Crescent Grid's outside stock administrator had received a formal records verification request concerning Amani Brooks-Reed's registered ownership and voting documentation. No accusation, no lawsuit, no demand, just a request for confirmation. Marcus read it twice, then gave a dismissive laugh that came a beat too late. She called Denise. Vanessa's mouth curved. Her divorce lawyer? Apparently, she needs someone to explain her own paperwork to her. He pushed the notice aside, but instead of returning to the investor materials, he opened his laptop and sent a message to corporate counsel asking whether Amani's request required any response from management. Across town, Amani sat at the small dining table inside her mother's old Inman Park townhouse, still wearing the dark blue dress beneath the camel coat she had never bothered to remove. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee. Afternoon light caught the worn grain of the hardwood floor, warming a space Marcus had always called impractical. Denise had advised her to spend the night there rather than return to Buckhead until they had reviewed the proposed settlement carefully. Amani's laptop was open to the current cap table. Marcus Reed, 31%. Amani Brooks Reed, 18. Employee option pool and early holders, 13. Cole Meridian Partners, 38. She stared at that final number longer than she intended. She had seen Cole Meridian on company materials before, watched its position grow over 14 months as early investors sold portions of their holdings. Marcus had treated it as proof that institutional money believed in him. He rarely mentioned the firm's founder, Elijah Cole, except when complaining that Cole Meridian asked too many questions about engineering costs and expansion assumptions. Amani closed the file when Denise called. Corporate counsel responded. Already. Marcus asked them to. Amani could hear pages moving on Denise's end. They're confirming the ownership records and reviewing the proxy, which means he knows we're looking. Good. Denise paused. That doesn't concern you? Amani looked toward the window, where bare branches moved softly against the brick courtyard. He wanted me scared of being seen. I'm done helping him with that. At Crescent Grid, Marcus's confidence began to fray when corporate counsel advised him not to make any representation about Amani's voting authority until the Series A documents had been reviewed. The anniversary presentation Vanessa had edited was quietly pulled from circulation as well, not because Amani demanded it, but because counsel did not want internal materials describing founder status while ownership questions were being verified. Vanessa stared at the cancellation. Notice on her tablet. This is ridiculous. She hasn't worked here in years. Marcus stood at the glass wall overlooking the engineering floor. She won't do anything. Then why are the lawyers suddenly checking documents? He turned on her sharply. Because lawyers bill by the hour. But his hand had tightened around his phone. That evening, Denise sent Amani a scanned copy of the ownership confirmation and asked her to review one more item before their meeting the next morning: the historical cap tables. Amani opened the oldest version first. Her 18% had survived every financing round exactly as reflected in the current ledger. She moved forward through the records, year by year, watching names change, investors enter, employees dilute, early holders sell. Then she reached the most recent 14 months and saw what Marcus had never bothered to frame as a threat. Cole Meridian had not arrived as a single dramatic purchase. It had accumulated position after position until 38% of Crescent Grid sat under one name. Amani leaned back slowly. Marcus had spent years telling her she was irrelevant because her 18% could not control the company. He had been so focused on diminishing her stake that he had never stopped to consider who now owned the largest one. 5 years earlier, Amani had signed the proxy because she still believed trust could be documented without being diminished. The memory returned in fragments as she sat at Denise Holloway's conference table the next morning, the old Series A binder open between them. Back then, Crescent Grid had occupied 3 cramped rooms above a printing shop near Midtown, where the radiators clanged through winter and the conference table had been bought used from a closing insurance office. Amani had spent nights there in socks, her shoes abandoned beneath a desk, tracing energy load patterns across a whiteboard until her handwriting slanted from exhaustion. Marcus had been the one pacing behind her, practicing the pitch he would deliver to investors the next morning. "Say it again," he had told her once, stopping beside the board. The part about predictive demand. Amani had looked over her shoulder, too tired to smile. "You're presenting it. Because you explain it like an engineer." "I am an engineer." He had laughed then, warm and easy, stepped behind her, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "And I'm the guy who gets people to understand why your brain is worth betting on." At the time, it had sounded like partnership. She had believed him. When the Series A financing finally came together, the lawyers filled a borrowed conference room with binders, signature packets, coffee, and the stale smell of takeout. Marcus moved through the room like electricity. He shook hands, answered questions, told investors where Crescent Grid would be in 5 years. Amani sat beside him, correcting technical assumptions in the margins of the presentation. When one investor questioned whether the platform could scale beyond a handful of commercial buildings, Marcus looked to her without hesitation. She answered for 20 minutes, walking through the architecture she had built. By the end, the investor nodded. Marcus squeezed her knee beneath the table. Later, outside in the hallway, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "You saved that round." She remembered that more clearly than she wanted to. The proxy came near the end of closing. Their lawyers explained that Marcus, as CEO and the public-facing founder, could vote Amani shares on certain matters so the company would not stall every time signatures were needed. Amani had her own counsel review it. She remembered Marcus leaning against the doorframe, impatient but smiling. "We're married," he said. "You trust me, don't you?" She had looked at him for a long second before answering. "That's not why I have a lawyer." He laughed as if she were teasing him. But her attorney had not laughed. She had marked several pages, narrowed the scope, and insisted on conditions that would prevent the arrangement from becoming permanent control disguised as convenience. Amani signed only after those changes were made. In the years that followed, convenience became habit. Marcus attended more investor meetings alone because Amani was too deep in product. Then he became the voice of the company because she didn't enjoy the spotlight. Then journalists stopped asking for her because Marcus told them she preferred privacy. Amani let it happen partly because she loved the work more than recognition, partly because she loved him, and partly because fighting for credit inside her own marriage felt uglier than surrendering it. Every silence became evidence in the story Marcus built about her absence. By the time she stepped away from daily operations, he no longer said she had chosen quiet. He said she had lost interest. Denise turned another page in the binder. Amani watched the old signatures pass beneath her fingertips, financing consents, stock records, board approvals. Then Denise stopped. "Here," she said. "The proxy. Same document. Same signatures. Same ink now faded slightly at the edges." Denise read the final sections once, then again, slower. Amani noticed the change in her face. "What?" Denise did not answer immediately. She rotated the binder toward Amani and placed one finger beneath a paragraph near the end. "Your lawyer did more than narrow this," she said. "She gave it an ending." The paragraph Denise pointed to had been sitting in the Series A binder for 5 years, unnoticed not because it was hidden, but because Marcus had stopped believing anything in that binder could still limit him. Amani leaned closer. The proxy had never transferred ownership of her 18%. The shares had remained registered in her name from the beginning, along with all economic rights attached to them. What she had granted Marcus was narrower, authority to vote those shares on specified corporate matters while the arrangement remained in effect. At the time, the structure had made sense. Marcus was CEO, fundraising required speed, and investors preferred a clear voice when routine approvals came before stockholders. But Amani's attorney had insisted that convenience inside a marriage could not become permanent corporate control if the marriage itself collapsed. Denise read the termination language aloud once, without drama. The proxy ended upon the filing of an action seeking dissolution of the marriage between Marcus Reed and Amani Brooks Reed. Amani stared at the sentence. For a moment she was back in the closing room years earlier, the fluorescent lights too bright, Marcus signing pages without reading more than the tabs. His own counsel had slid the packet toward him and said, "There are reciprocal protections in the founder documents. Standard cleanup for the financing." Marcus had signed where indicated, already half-turned toward an investor waiting by the door. Amani remembered asking him later whether he wanted a copy of the final binder at home. "You keep it," he had said, loosening his tie. "If there's ever a problem, the lawyers will tell us." Denise tapped the signature page now. Marcus's name was there, acknowledging the broader closing package that incorporated the proxy and its terms. Nothing had been added later. Nothing had been concealed from him. He had simply treated legal limits the way he treated Amani's technical contributions, useful when needed, invisible when inconvenient. So he never owned the voting rights, Amani said. Denise shook her head. Not in the way he talks about them. He had contractual authority to exercise them within the scope of this proxy. The stock remained yours. Amani traced the edge of the paper but did not touch the signature. And if the marriage ended? Not when the divorce becomes final. Denise looked directly at her. When an action for dissolution is filed. The room seemed to become very still. Outside the glass wall, a receptionist passed carrying a stack of folders. Somewhere down the hall, a printer started and stopped. Ordinary sounds. Amani reached for the cream-colored birthday envelope she had carried from Buckhead. She removed the complaint and turned to the first page. Filed in Fulton County. Date stamped. 9:12 a.m. on her 30th birthday. Marcus had not merely threatened divorce. He had initiated the action exactly as the clause described. Denise did not celebrate. "I want corporate counsel to confirm the effect before anyone takes action," she said. "The proxy language is strong, but we do this correctly. We verify the filing, the stock records, and the current governance documents. No surprises. No shortcuts." Amani nodded. That mattered to her more than winning fast. "Does Marcus know?" Denise's expression hardened slightly. He knew when he signed the financing documents. Whether he remembers now is another question. Across the city, Marcus was preparing for the investor dinner, telling Vanessa that Amani's records request was noise and that the company still moved through him. He had no reason, in his mind, to reconsider the sentence he had repeated the night before. "Those votes have been handled through me for years." Back in Denise's office, Amani placed the filed complaint beside the old proxy. 5 years separated the two documents. Marcus's signature appeared in one file. His decision had created the other. For the first time, Amani saw them not as pieces of different lives, but as cause and consequence. At 9:12 the previous morning, Marcus had filed to end his marriage. Without realizing it, he may also have filed to end his authority over her 18%. By the time Crescent Grid's corporate counsel confirmed that Amani's 18% remained registered in her name, Marcus had already decided that waiting was more dangerous than moving. He understood enough to know she was examining the old proxy, and that alone changed the rhythm inside the Midtown headquarters. Vanessa noticed it first. Marcus stopped dismissing Amani as irrelevant and started speaking about timing. That afternoon, behind the closed glass doors of his office, he pulled up materials for a strategic transaction he had been quietly urging the board to consider. An accelerated sale of Crescent Grid to a larger infrastructure company before questions about governance could slow the process. The idea itself was not secret. Marcus had floated expansion and acquisition possibilities for months. What changed now was the urgency. If he could secure board support, lock in favorable terms, and move the transaction far enough forward, he believed Amani would face a choice between accepting a lucrative exit or looking like the bitter, estranged wife obstructing hundreds of employees from cashing out. Vanessa stood beside the screen while he revised the presentation. Her proposed role after the transaction was listed under post-close. Leadership, Chief Brand and Communications Officer, expanded authority over Crescent Grid's public identity, investor messaging, and founder narrative. Once this is announced, she said, nobody is going to care who wrote code 7 years ago. Marcus did not correct her. On another slide, his own title continued under the acquiring company's leadership structure. CEO, Crescent Grid Division. Amani's name appeared nowhere. What Marcus believed made the plan possible was not ownership of her stock, but something he had relied on so long that he no longer separated the two. I still control the founder block, he told Vanessa. 31 plus her 18. That's how every major vote has worked. Vanessa studied him. Even if she fights the divorce, her shares are hers economically. Voting has always run through me. Always. The word carried more confidence than the documents did. Across town, Amani sat with Denise and a copy of the transaction materials that had been circulated to major stockholders for an upcoming governance discussion. She read them slowly. There was no hidden bank account, no secret transfer waiting to be discovered. The insult was cleaner than that. Marcus intended to use the authority he assumed he still possessed to help shape a sale that would preserve his position, elevate Vanessa, and permanently cement the public version of Crescent Grid in which Amani had become a footnote. Denise watched her reach the leadership slide. You don't have to let this advance, she said. Once corporate counsel confirms the proxy termination, we can notify them immediately. Amani kept reading. Her face did not change when she saw Vanessa's expanded title. It did not change when she reached the founder history language Marcus had approved. But something inside her settled into place. For years she had wondered whether Marcus had erased her accidentally, one small compromise at a time. Now the answer sat in 12-point type. He was doing it deliberately. When is the governance meeting? She asked. Denise gave her the date. They'll circulate the voting materials before then. Amani closed the packet. Has Marcus been told the proxy may have terminated? Corporate counsel knows it's under review. He knows we're questioning it. I don't know what his lawyers have told him privately. Amani looked toward the old proxy beside the filed divorce complaint. Marcus had finally understood that she might still have rights. He had simply misunderstood their size. Don't stop the meeting, she said. Denise studied her. You want him to proceed? I want everything done properly. Let him put the proposal on the record. Let him state what authority he thinks he has. There was no satisfaction in her voice, only decision. If Marcus wanted a public corporate process, Amani would give him one. She would not ambush him in a kitchen or fight Vanessa through gossip. She would let the notices go out, let the votes be prepared, and let the company's own records answer the question Marcus had spent years answering for her. Marcus arrived at Crescent Grid's boardroom 20 minutes early, carrying the confidence of a man who believed the meeting was only a formality. The glass-walled room overlooked Midtown Atlanta, late afternoon sun flashing against neighboring towers, while the long walnut table reflected neatly arranged voting packets, water glasses, and the transaction presentation he had revised with Vanessa the night before. She sat 2 seats behind him with a legal pad open, dressed in a cream suit that matched the polished calm she wore whenever she expected cameras eventually to follow. Amani entered without announcement. Navy suit. Natural hair drawn back. No entourage, no dramatic pause. She carried only a slim folder and took the seat assigned to her as a stockholder observer for the governance discussion. Marcus glanced at her once, then looked away with deliberate indifference. He had spent the morning telling directors that the proposed sale protected shareholder value, preserved jobs, and gave Crescent Grid the scale it needed. He had also told them that domestic turbulence should not be allowed to interfere with corporate strategy. Now, with everyone seated, he repeated the message more carefully. This company cannot afford paralysis because of a personal dispute, he said. Amani kept her hands folded over the folder. He moved through the slides, valuation ranges, integration projections, leadership continuity. Then came the post-close structure. His own name remained at the top of Crescent Grid operations. Vanessa's expanded communications role appeared beneath. Amani's name did not appear anywhere. One independent director asked whether all significant stockholder voting rights had been properly accounted for. Marcus answered before corporate counsel could speak. Yes, my 31%, together with the 18% historically voted under the founder proxy, gives us a clear path. That voting structure has been in place for years. The room went still in the subtle way rooms do when lawyers hear someone say more than they should. Amani did not move. Marcus continued, perhaps sensing resistance and mistaking it for hesitation. Amani retains the economic ownership of her shares. No one disputes that. But operational governance has consistently been exercised through me under the existing proxy, and I intend to vote that block in favor of advancing the transaction. Vanessa lowered her pen. The statement was now on the record. Not gossip, not interpretation whispered in a kitchen. Marcus had publicly declared the authority he believed he still possessed and tied that authority directly to the proposed sale. Amani looked at him across the table. For an instant, she saw the man from years earlier in the borrowed office, asking her to explain the technology so he could explain it to everyone else. Then the image vanished beneath the present one, a CEO, using her silence as proof that her voice belonged to him. The board chair asked corporate counsel to clarify the voting status before discussion proceeded. Marcus leaned back. We've already been through this. Not fully, counsel replied. It was the first time his confidence visibly shifted. The company's attorney opened the Series A closing binder, the same red-tabbed set of documents Marcus had dismissed in the Buckhead kitchen, and placed a certified copy of the voting proxy beside the Fulton County divorce filing Denise had submitted for verification. He confirmed the stock ledger first. Amani Brooks Reed remained, the registered owner of 18% of Crescent Grid's outstanding common equity. Then he addressed the proxy. Marcus interrupted. That document has been relied on for 5 years. It has, counsel said, subject to its terms. Amani heard Vanessa stop breathing behind him. Counsel turned to the termination section and read the operative language into the meeting record, then referenced the filing date on the divorce complaint. Marcus's face hardened. That can't be what that means. The attorney did not argue. The company has completed its review. He looked toward the board chair, then toward Amani. The chair adjusted the voting packet in front of him and spoke with a formality that made the moment colder than any outburst could have. Before we proceed further, Ms. Brooks Reed, corporate counsel has confirmed that your shares are to be voted by you. Please take your place at the table. Amani did not move immediately when the board chair invited her to take her place at the table. She looked first at the documents in front of corporate counsel, the current stock ledger confirming 18% in her name, the Series A proxy carrying her signature, the termination language her lawyer had insisted on 5 years earlier, and Marcus's divorce complaint stamped by Fulton County at 9:12 a.m. on her birthday. Then she stood. No smile. No glance toward Vanessa. Just the quiet scrape of her chair against the carpet as she crossed the room and took the empty seat at the walnut table. Corporate counsel continued for the record. The company has verified that Ms. Brooks Reed remains the registered holder of 18% of Crescent Grid's outstanding common equity. The proxy previously granted to Mr. Reed terminated upon the filing of the divorce action identified in the agreement. Effective from that filing, Mr. Reed no longer possessed authority under the proxy to vote Ms. Brooks Reed's shares. Marcus pushed his chair back so abruptly that it struck the credenza behind him. No, we've used that proxy for years. He reached across the table, pulled the binder toward himself, and flipped to the signature pages with both hands. There has to be another provision. We reviewed the full document, counsel said. Marcus turned toward the board chair. This meeting was noticed on the assumption of an existing voting structure. You cannot just change control in the middle of the room. No one is changing ownership, counsel replied. We are recognizing the authority reflected in the governing documents. Amani watched him search the pages. That was the first concrete sign that his certainty had broken. He was no longer dismissing old paperwork. He was hunting through it. The board chair then asked that the updated voting schedule be entered into the meeting materials. A secretary replaced the prior tally sheet with a corrected one showing Marcus at 31% and Amani voting her own 18. Cole Meridian Partners remained listed at 38. Marcus saw the numbers and stopped turning pages. 38, 18, 56. Elijah Cole, seated farther down the table as Cole Meridian's representative, did not rescue Amani with a speech. He simply confirmed how his firm intended to vote against advancing the accelerated sale under the current leadership structure and in favor of a formal governance review. The board chair called for the stockholder action necessary to proceed under the updated voting authority. Marcus leaned toward Elijah. "You're letting a divorce dispute dictate corporate policy." Elijah looked at him evenly. "No, we're letting ownership dictate voting." Marcus stood. "This is my company." Amani finally spoke. "It's a company you founded with me." Her voice was level enough that the sentence required no decoration. Marcus looked toward the directors as if someone might correct her. No one did. The vote proceeded according to the verified ownership and applicable company procedures. With Amani's 18% aligned with Cole Meridian's 38%, the controlling bloc supported an immediate governance review and rejected Marcus's attempt to move the sale forward under the disputed assumptions. The board then convened the executive portion of the meeting to address leadership authority during that review. Marcus tried to object again, but this time the objection was directed to counsel, not Amani. "You're suspending me over a proxy?" "No," the board chair said. "We are responding to the governance issues now on the record, including your assertion of voting authority you did not possess and your attempt to advance a major transaction on that basis." The first resolution was procedural, not theatrical. Marcus's authority to act unilaterally on the proposed sale was suspended pending review, and all external transaction communications required board approval effective immediately. His access to issue instructions concerning the sale process was revoked before the meeting adjourned. Amani watched the secretary enter the resolution into the minutes. Marcus had begun her birthday by placing legal papers in front of her and assuming the signature lines belonged to him. Now, for the first time, an official record was being created without his permission, and it limited what he was allowed to do next. By 7 the next morning, Crescent Grid's board had moved from review to containment. Marcus learned it when his phone stopped opening the company's transaction dashboard. He tried again, then called operations, only to be told that access to the proposed sale workspace had been restricted under the board resolution entered the previous evening. No one had frozen his personal accounts. No one had stripped him of his stock. His 31% still belonged to him. What changed was narrower and more painful. He could no longer speak for the company on the deal as though his judgment alone were enough. An emergency board session was scheduled for 9. Vanessa arrived at headquarters before him and found her own revised communications plan locked in draft status. The post-close leadership slide she had helped prepare was gone from the active materials. Her title had never existed outside a proposal, but for weeks Marcus had spoken about it as though the future had already been signed. "You said this was done," she told him when he entered his office. Marcus tossed his briefcase onto the sofa. "It was supposed to be." "Supposed to be?" She stared at him. "You told me you controlled the votes." "I did." "No, you controlled a proxy that ended when you filed for divorce." The words came out sharper than she intended. Marcus turned toward her. "Do not make this about Amani." Vanessa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You made it about Amani when you built the transaction around authority you didn't have." For the first time, the future Marcus had promised her looked less like a promotion and more like a story he had been telling himself. At 9, the board reconvened with corporate counsel, the updated stock ledger, the Series A proxy, and the prior meeting record already circulated. Nothing new needed to be discovered. The damage was in what Marcus had said and attempted while claiming control over shares that were no longer his to vote. The directors reviewed his effort to accelerate the sale, the leadership continuity materials, and the communication language minimizing Amani's founder role. Marcus argued that every decision had been made to protect shareholder value. One independent director asked why he had not paused the transaction once counsel began reviewing the proxy. Marcus answered too quickly, "Because I knew what the agreement meant." Amani, seated across the table, lowered her eyes to the minutes. There it was again, certainty where diligence should have been. The board broke for deliberation. When the directors returned, the chair read the resolution aloud. Marcus Reed was removed as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately and would retain only the rights attached to his 31% ownership while the company completed a structured leadership transition. He was directed to surrender executive credentials, return company-controlled devices used for CEO functions, and cease representing himself as authorized to negotiate the proposed sale. Marcus stood before the chair finished. You can't run Crescent Grid without me. No one answered immediately. He looked at Amani then, expecting victory in her face. There was none, only exhaustion. This is what you wanted, he said. Amani shook her head once. No, I wanted you to stop using my silence as your authority. Outside the boardroom, Vanessa removed the temporary executive badge Marcus had arranged for her during the transaction process and left it on his desk. She did not say goodbye. By afternoon, rumors had already begun moving through engineering, customer teams, and the operations floor. Amani knew what revenge would look like if she wanted it. Cancel projects. Fire Marcus loyalists. Publicize every humiliation. Let the company bleed until no one could forget who had caused it. Instead, she asked for the employee retention report, the customer renewal schedule, and the list of teams exposed to uncertainty from the suspended sale. No layoffs because of this, she told the directors. No clients used as leverage. No engineers punished for who they reported to. The board chair looked at her carefully. And Marcus? Amani glanced through the glass wall toward the office he was being required to vacate. Marcus keeps what he actually owns, she said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Then she turned back to the operating reports. She had spent years being erased from Crescent Grid. She would not reclaim it by erasing everyone else. 3 weeks after Marcus was removed as CEO, Crescent Grid no longer felt like a company holding its breath. Amani had not stepped into his office and claimed the chair. Instead, the board approved a structured transition. She would serve as executive chair and interim chief product and strategy officer, while an experienced operating executive handled day-to-day CEO responsibilities during the search for permanent leadership. The arrangement suited her. She had never wanted Marcus's title. She wanted the company to stop confusing visibility with ownership and charisma with governance. Her first weeks were spent in rooms Marcus used to avoid: engineering reviews, customer renewal meetings, product risk sessions, staffing discussions. She asked questions, listened longer than people expected, and refused to let the board use the leadership crisis as an excuse for indiscriminate cuts. The suspended sale remained suspended. Customer commitments were honored. Key engineers were offered retention packages already within the company's approved compensation structure, not as gifts from Amani, but through board-reviewed measures designed to keep critical teams intact. She also asked that the founder history materials be corrected across internal archives. Not rewritten, corrected. The original photograph from the early office was restored to the Crescent Grid lobby, Marcus smiling toward the camera, Amani half-turned toward the whiteboard behind them, one hand still holding a marker. No one was cropped out. That mattered to her more than she expected. Vanessa resigned before the transition period ended. There was no public scene. Her proposed expanded role had never been formally approved, and without Marcus's executive authority behind it, the future she had assumed was hers disappeared with the transaction she helped sell internally. She left with the position and compensation she had actually earned up to that point, nothing more. Marcus's consequences were equally precise. He kept his 31% ownership. He remained entitled to whatever economic value those shares carried. But he no longer controlled Crescent Grid's operations, could not negotiate on its behalf, and could not use Amani's votes to create the illusion of a founder block that no longer existed. Their divorce moved forward separately through settlement discussions in Fulton County. Amani did not ask the court to turn corporate discipline into marital punishment. The Buckhead house, investment accounts, and other marital issues were handled through negotiation between counsel. She insisted on accurate valuation, complete disclosure, and clean separation. Nothing theatrical. Nothing designed for headlines. During one settlement conference, Marcus sat across from her at a polished table much smaller than Crescent Grid's boardroom. He looked different without the company around him. Not poorer, not ruined, simply less amplified. Was this always the plan? He asked. Amani knew what he meant. The proxy, Cole Meridian, the vote, the removal. No, she said. The plan was to stay married. He looked down at his hands. And after that, she thought of the birthday cake, the envelope, Vanessa's name flashing across his phone, the way he had said comfortable as if shrinking her life were an act of mercy. After that, she said, the plan was to stop signing away pieces of myself because it made your life easier. He did not answer. Weeks later, Amani carried the last box out of Buckhead and drove to the Inman Park townhouse her mother had left her. The magnolia branches scraped softly against the upstairs window in the evening wind. She unpacked slowly. Books, clothes, a framed photograph, the old Series A binder. When she reached the cream-colored birthday envelope, she held it for several seconds before setting it on the kitchen counter. The marriage was nearly finished. Crescent Grid was stable. Marcus no longer spoke with her voice. Yet one question remained, quieter than all the others. If freedom was no longer something she had to fight for, what would she choose to do with it? 6 months later, Crescent Grid's lobby looked almost the same from the street, but inside, the story had changed. The original founder photograph hung beneath a simple plaque listing both names, and engineers moved past it without ceremony on their way to product reviews, customer calls, and the ordinary work of keeping a company alive. Amani no longer flinched when she saw herself in the frame. She had become accustomed to walking through the building without asking permission. The board had completed its leadership transition, the suspended sale had been abandoned, and the company had stabilized under a structure that separated governance from ego. Amani remained executive chair and chief product and strategy officer, spending more time with engineering and long-range strategy than with cameras or speeches. Employee turnover slowed. Several major customers renewed. The company did not become perfect, and she did not try to make it a monument to what Marcus had done to her. She made it functional, fair, durable. At home in Inman Park, the changes were quieter. The old townhouse no longer felt like a retreat she had been forced into. It felt chosen. She kept the Series A binder on a shelf in her study, not hidden, not displayed. The cream-colored birthday envelope stayed in a drawer for months until the final divorce settlement was signed. Marcus kept his 31% of Crescent Grid. Amani kept her 18%. The marital assets were divided through counsel, and the Buckhead house passed out of her daily life with less emotion than she expected. Their last meeting happened not in court, but in a conference room after the final papers were complete. Marcus stood by the window when Amani entered. Without the CEO title attached to him, he seemed smaller only because there was finally nothing around him enlarging his voice. "You look happy," he said. Amani set her signed documents on the table. "I'm peaceful." He nodded as though the distinction hurt more than anger would have. "Elijah?" The name came carefully. Amani met his eyes. "Elijah is part of my life. Nothing more." Nothing offered for Marcus to measure himself against. He looked down at the settlement papers. "I thought you'd come back once things settled down." Amani held his gaze for a moment, remembering the birthday cake, the yellow signature tabs, the certainty with which he had told her she would be comfortable. "You kept waiting for the version of me that needed your permission," she said. Then she picked up her coat and left. That evening, back at the townhouse, Elijah arrived with a small chocolate cupcake from a neighborhood bakery and one candle pressed crookedly into the frosting. "This is 6 months late," he said. Amani smiled as she opened the door wider. Still better timing than the last one. They ate on the porch while Atlanta softened into evening, traffic humming beyond the trees. There was no proposal, no promise large enough to replace what she had already learned to give herself. When Elijah left, Amani returned to the kitchen and opened the drawer where the old birthday envelope had waited. For Amani, a new beginning. She read Marcus's handwriting once, then slid the unsigned proposed settlement out of it and placed both in the recycling bin beneath the counter. No fire, no tearing, no audience. The next morning, she walked into Crescent Grid before sunrise and found the engineering floor already glowing with monitors. On the glass wall of the conference room, someone had written a new product equation beside one of her original architecture diagrams. Amani picked up a marker and added a correction. Then she stepped back, coffee warming her hand, and watched the numbers settle into place. Marcus had given his wife divorce papers as a birthday gift because he believed he was ending her place in his life. He never expected the filing itself would end his right to speak with her 18%.